Hey guys, it's Liv here, and in today's video I wanted to discuss the new Terastal mechanic and why I not only think it will be actually pretty balanced and competitive, but also some really good Pokemon that I think could actually take advantage of this. So if you guys want to see more content like this, any sort of competitive discussion videos or Scarlet and Violet pre-discussion videos, leave a like below and subscribe for more, and comment your thoughts on what Pokemon you think will actually be really good at abusing Terastal down below. I'd love to see your ideas, of course, and with that said, let's set the ground rules. So for one, I am only including Pokemon that are either confirmed as of Cerebi in the Scarlet and Violet Pokedex. This means if you click on the Paldea Pokedex tab under the Scarlet and Violet game, they show up. Or B, Pokemon that are legendaries that are specifically not mythicals. And this is mostly because of the fact that we do have the confirmed raid feature again, and my guess is at some point through the game's life cycle we'll get another DLC that will introduce a lot of these legendary Pokemon. So if it's not a mythical, I'm going to count it on today's list at the very least because I think it will eventually be in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Now, in terms of what we're going to classify the Terastal mechanic is, we're going to go off of the current speculated method that has been flooding the internet, because at the very least it gives us some form to actually discuss this mechanic. So, we'll take this Magnemite example on screen, of course, now. Basically, if you have the Electric and Steel Magnemite, and you're not Terastalized, you just get your normal stabs. This is what we've seen through Pokemon Gens 1 through 8. Pokemon will just get stabs for the typing it has. If you use a Terastalized type of a Pokemon, or of a type that's not on the Pokemon you're using it on, in this case Magnemite's using a Terastalized normal, you would only gain stab for the normal typing and for nothing else. This means you lose both your stabs for Electric and Steel, but you also lose the weaknesses associated with those types, besides fighting, which you would keep because you're still sticking with normal. And finally, if you use a Terastalized type of a type you already have, if you're a dual type Pokemon, you lose the other typing. So in Magnemite's case, it's Electric Steel using an Electric type Terastalized Crystal. It would only be an Electric type now. It would no longer have the Steel stab. But on the flip side though, its Electric typing would still get a boost already beyond the stab limit. It's speculated this is a 2x boost, which would actually be pretty cool, especially seeing the fact that this also does still work on single type Pokemon. So even if you don't necessarily lose a type to make this work, you still gain the benefits. So in my opinion, I have a bunch of Pokemon that I think could be pretty viable in OU, even if it's just for the very first few months of the games. And with that said, let's start off with the first candidate being Terastalized Dark Tyranitar. Now, I will preface really quick, I think that Terastalized Rock Tyranitar could also be viable, but in this case specifically, I think that Dark will outshine pretty clearly, at least after the first couple weeks. Terastalized Dark Tyranitar could take advantage of the ability Unnerve and actually be a pretty damning setup sweeper with Dragon Dance. Whether the move itself ends up being a special or physical move, it seems like there is a move associated with this that is going to function basically as Hidden Power, and instead of the Hidden Power type, it's going to take advantage of the Terra Crystal type, which we don't know how that's even going to be associated with Pokemon, but I digress. Regardless though, even if that doesn't end up being a physical move, Tyranitar still has a really strong stab crunch that would be boosted even further by the pure Dark association with the Terra Crystal Dark, so I think the Tyranitar actually is an amazing candidate for this. It would be a lot better if a weakness policy Pokemon due to its insane bulk already and the fact it would no longer be 4 times weak to fighting, which is actually a pretty good thing for Tyranitar. Not only this, but Tyranitar actually has some pretty solid coverage for common fighting weaknesses. For example, Tyranitar has some good coverage for fighting types through, I believe it has Aerial Ace, which to be fair, that's a little bit weaker of a move, but even still, not a bad option. If you're trying to, let's say, cover Pokemon that are bug type, you obviously have stuff like Fire Punch, and you also have your Rock type moves. So Tyranitar does definitely have options if needed. Even for Fairy typing, you have moves such as Iron Head that can definitely cover those. So Tyranitar has coverage for a lot of the weaknesses that would be associated with a pure Dark type. And again, the bulk would be a lot better suited on Tyranitar. You could pull off Dragon Dances a lot easier. And yeah, I think the Tyranitar actually could be an amazing Pokemon, especially if you're able to throw on held items to this, which it seems like this Terra typing thing will either be a key item or maybe just an IV based thing again. But Tyranitar could especially end up pulling off even just a Choice Bandit set and just absolutely shadow teams with basically an adaptability boosted Dark hit like we see on Pokemon such as Groudon, for example, and Trick Room. So I think a Tyranitar actually could be a really amazing user of this ability, or of this mechanic I should say. But next up we have what I think will probably be the best example of a current OU Pokemon that has a specific one type Terra that I think will be useful, being Heatran. So Heatran's one of those legendary Pokemon that will probably be in Sword and Shield or in Scarlet and Violet because of the precedent set by Sword and Shield. While I don't think it will necessarily be there on launch, this is a Pokemon I think that down the line when it's introduced could be an amazing Terra flying user. And while I think that Ground could still be a really strong candidate for this, I think it gaining an actual flying stab and having the Earthquake coverage option for specifically Electric types while having the Stone Edge coverage option for Ice types could be actually an amazing thing for Landorus. because basically with the edge weight coverage plus a pure flying type Pokemon, you would cover all of your weaknesses perfectly on Landorus, and you could run a Sword Stance, Edge Quake, flying move set. This does of course assume that the Terra move is actually a physical option, or at least has a physical counterpart to it. But even still, you can actually run Fly pretty successfully at that point if you're a pure flying type Landorus, and you don't really have to worry about a lot of different coverage because you cover anything that would actually hit you super effectively for perfect damage. This would also be really great with Intimidate, of course, because you could get even more benefits out of not being as weak to Pokemon like Weavile, for example. So I do think this Pokemon actually has a lot going for it, in my personal opinion. I think that Landorus already is an amazing setup sweeper, and I don't think it'll actually be too broken, considering the fact that Z Landorus was allowed in OU, and it really ended up being pretty balanced out. I think it's going to be one of those Pokemon that will be really hot on like extremely offensive, specifically Landorus tailored builds. But I think that most teams will probably end up having, coincidentally speaking, a better Terra user, in my personal opinion. I do want to get into some Pokemon I think will really shine early on, though, and will completely disappear after like the first month or so. We're going to start with the Pokemon I think that will be, well, actually, I'm going to move these down. No, never mind. I'll cover these. So these are Pokemon that previously have benefited from both Z moves and also Dynamax, and they ended up being really good abusers of them. And I want to cover them both together, being Gyarados and Salamence. These two basically fall in the same atmosphere, but I'm going to go with Gyarados because Gyarados ended up, in my personal opinion, being the slightly better option of the two. But again, they both basically fall under the same umbrella of they're really good with getting an extra flying option and clicking Moxie and going for game that way. Or just going for Intimidate and going that way. These are basically the Landorus Lights that will probably function as the pre-Landorus option for Terra abusing. Gyarados I think will be slightly better because of the fact that you can actually take advantage of a type that you are currently 4 times weak to and get an immunity out of it, whereas Salamence would do that with Ice, but it's only getting resistance out of it. And also Ground would be a lot better of an option on Gyarados than Steel would be on Salamence, or even like, let's say Fire. It would just be a lot better to abuse the Ground from Gyarados than anything you could do with Salamence while still actually getting resistance. Because even if you were to, let's say, do Terra Ground on Salamence as well, you're still weak to Ice, so it's still a pretty transparent way to hit you. So I think Gyarados will just basically be a better version of Salamence with this ability. Though, I can't lie, one benefit that Salamence has that's a pretty amazing benefit is the fact that you would actually, one, you would have slightly higher damaging options for flying should the special Terra move be special option only. And two, you would have higher special attack if you wanted to abuse that. And finally, actual recovery is pretty useful. Even still, though, I think that typically for the, especially early meta, but as far as the sweeper goes, Gyarados will probably be the slightly better option here. But for all intents and purposes, Salamence and Gyarados will basically function the exact same way as far as abusing Terra, Ground, and Flying. I think these could be cool Pokemon on VGC, especially pre-Gyarados, on a pre-Landorus meta, but I don't think that either will be standout. Maybe Salamence might end up being a cool tail-end user, to be fair. But again, I think that they're both going to be kind of outclassed once Landorus does eventually arrive. Next up, though, we're going to start to get into the Pokemon that I honestly cannot predict what Terra will be viable on them, but I think these will be pretty clear-cut Pokemon that will be top tier in OU. The first up, of course, being Latios. So Latios is one of those Pokemon I actually think that is basically just set to be a very amazing abuser of Terra. I think the clear, obvious choice here would be an Electric Terra, specifically, with Bolt Beam, Calm Mind, and Roost being pretty amazing options to run on this Pokemon. With Ice Beam obviously being to cover any sort of ground types that would try and phase you, or even just any sort of Pokemon like, for example, Moldbreaker or Haxorus that might end up showing up, or Gravity Landorus Therian that might show up. And on top of this as well, obviously having the Roost and Calm Mind with your 110 speed could be a pretty amazing option. You'd basically need a physical Scarfer to kill us at that point, and you wouldn't really get any super effective options, again, unless you're running a Scarf Moldbreaker Pokemon. So I think that Latios could actually be a great abuser of this. However, even outside of just the electric option, which feels pretty obvious, you do still have a lot of other good Terra options because of how many weaknesses Latios has and how many potential stabs this Pokemon can run as well. So even if the Terra move ends up being terrible, you still have a viable option. Dragon and Psychic obviously come to mind. They're very good offensive options, and being able to go around potentially a Psychic check or a Dark check or a Dragon check by running a Terra type for the other and getting stab for it. Like, let's say if I'm expecting Latios to be a Terra Dragon and I switch to a Fairy type, I go for Terra Psychic and I'm extra boosted on my Psychic stab. That'd be pretty terrible for a lot of Latios switch-ins. To be fair, the middle ground for this would obviously be a Steel type Pokemon, but having Latios go for a Terra Ground and just go for the coverage that would be that Terra move, or even a Terra Fighting and getting Aura Sphere or Terra Fire and going with Mystical Fire, you have a lot of other coverage options depending on what steals into being viable and what ones would end up specifically switching in on Latios. I could actually see Latios being one of those few Pokemon I think that gets banned specifically because of Terra if the mechanic ends up being allowed through the generation. It's one of those things that I think it's a lot better than Z moves were for it, considering the fact that you actually could change the type around what was switching on you. And not only that, but Latios' coverage is a lot better than it was in Generation 7. So with that in mind, I do think that Latios is actually probably the only Pokemon in here that I think actually might get banned because of Terra. I tried to not list too many Pokemon I thought might get banned because I didn't want to make something absurdly broken. But I think that Latios might be an exception that at least gets a suspect test. Next up though, we do have Heatran, another one I think that could have more than just a couple different Terra types. This is one specifically I think would either be ground, fire, steel, and grass. Basically, this is just going to function as Z-Heatran for all intents and purposes. I think you could technically run a flying Terra on this as well because it would help you with the ground weakness that you currently have a 4 times weakness to. And especially as far as ice typing goes, for example, you're currently at base 1 4 times resistant, so no one's instinctive preference would be to click an ice move on a Pokemon just because it might be Terra Ice. However, I think that grass would be objectively better at this because it doesn't really gain any new weaknesses. At least nothing that's like too damning. And on top of it as well, it would still be a ground resistant at the very least, and you'd still have coverage your ground types through Solar Beam, which even if the Terra move sucked, would still be good, whereas Terra Flying would be pretty neutral, and you'd still have to run Sunny Day, and you wouldn't even get the stab for Solar Beam. So I think the Heatran would probably just stick to the stabs, ground, and grass. Ground would especially be good for Pex. I think it would just be an even quicker way to kill Toxapex at this point, but again, you have a lot of different options with Heatran. I don't really think a Heatran would necessarily be broken, but I am kind of interested actually in the Terra Grass option with Flash Fire. It might be a finally really amazing way to take advantage of that. Because as I said, Sunny Day with Earth Power, Sunny Day, Flamethrower, and Solar Beam might actually be a pretty cool set on this, and I kind of do want to try that on launch. At least the first game that Heatran is in, I should say. But next up though, we have Magnezone, and this one I actually think is a pretty interesting one. I feel like I haven't really seen a lot of people talk about how good Magnezone could be at both trapping opposing Terra Pokemon with a Terra typing that could counter them, but also as an abuser to other different steals with Terra typings. I think Magnezone could have a lot of different roles in terms of OU. For example, if let's say I'm trying to trap a Terra Steel Pokemon, I could go with, let's say, a Terra Fighting or a Terra Ground Magnezone and handle those specific Pokemon that would otherwise Terastallize Steel pretty efficiently. But not only this, I could also actually use this to take advantage of current Steel types that might not end up being Terra Crystals on the opposing Pokemon's team. For example, if my opponent's already revealed their Terastallized Pokemon and they have a Heatran at the same time, I can switch in Magnezone and go for a Terastallized Water, and I wall out both of Heatran's stabs while still having a super effective way to take it out. A similar type of logic could obviously be applied to something like a Ferrothorn or a Scizor and going for Terastallized Fire, but the logic being is that Magnezone has a lot of different options it could run, and it could actually be really deadly in this format, in my personal opinion. I think this could be one of those really rare cases where you might even see a Magnet Pull suspect test, assuming that Terastallize ends up actually being allowed, because I do think that Magnezone could actually get a little bit out of control. But again, this is pre-meta speculation, and for what it's worth, who knows what the meta will end up actually being like. Maybe Magnezone just sucks. But I do think it's a Pokemon that at least on launch sounds like an interesting option. Next up, I want to finally go over some Pokemon that are currently not even in the OU tier, but I think actually might have some really early meta viability. I'm talking like the first 1 to 3 months of metagame. We might see some at least niche cases of these being usable. The first up being Terra Electric Hydreigon. Now, I do think that unlike Latios, Hydreigon would have a lot less options to run. You could definitely go with Darker Dragon, but I think that ultimately Electric would probably be the best case with Terastallized Electric Move, Hydro Pump, Nasty Plot, and Roost specifically as a set. For all of these Pokemon going from Hydreigon on, I tried to actually make a specific set for them to try and prove why I think they might be viable, and I think this Hydreigon set might be a really good early game, or early meta specifically set. This would be the type of Pokemon I think that would actually try and force any sort of Gravity Pokemon, or at the very least maybe like some sort of Gravity Explosion Pokemon into a Scarf Ground type Pokemon. But that's also dependent on the fact that obviously Terastallize would have to at that point wear off on Switch. If it doesn't wear off on Switch like Megas did, for example, then I think at that point you wouldn't really have a super consistent way around this. I think that basically this would just be something you would just need to out offense and just maybe sack a Pokemon too, but I think that later on in the meta it just end up being like some sort of C- Pokemon. Early on though, this is probably going to be the equivalent of how Loloak always starts off as a really high tier OU Pokemon and then peters off within a month. Next up though, I do have a Pokemon I think is a lot more comparable to Marowak though, Colossal. And this is a Pokemon I think that might actually be a pretty interesting one. I think this will be a lot more useful in VGC for what it's worth, but I think that a Meteor Beam, Flamethrower, Ancient Power, and Scald set could actually be pretty terrifying. With this current set, this is implied for OU obviously, with the +1 boost, well the +6 boost to speed I should say, you should be able to outpace Zeraora, which is like the fastest Pokemon I can see really being a thing in OU. This implies of course the 143 speed, though you could make this faster obviously if you want to outpace 150s or 160s, if any end up being viable. With Meteor Beam, obviously, you're able to get your +1 special attack boost immediately with Power Herb, and you do some pretty good damage to a lot of neutral Pokemon. Between Meteor Beam and Flame Power and Ancient Power, you can actually get a lot of good coverage. And thanks to the pure rock typing, you're also a lot less weak to opposing water types. So you could maybe get that 4th slot to either, as I said, with Heatran, you could maybe go for a Solar Beam, or if you're trying to hit ground types like this set is, you could maybe even go for Scald, which would be great for Pokemon like Landorus that end up running through you pretty consistently. Or even Heatran, which again would still be a Steel type and would still hit you pretty well. And again, you'd have an option with +1 Scald to hit that actually pretty well. Colossal could also run some other options. For example, you could go with Water, which would resist both Water and Fire and still pop Steam Eruption, and you'd get the Scald boost for Stab. You could go with Grass, but you'd end up being still weak to Fire, which could have some benefits to it, obviously, because initially you're probably not going to end up switching this in to take a Fire hit, or at the very least, well, most likely what you're probably going to do is you're going to switch this in to take a Water type hit. You're going to take it on the Terra Grass, and then you're going to end up resisting it. But if your opponent does have coverage for Fire and ends up actually hitting you super effectively, it could be pretty bad once you're a Grass type, because maybe you end up actually playing into your opponent's prediction. Regardless, though, this could still be a pretty interesting one. I think it's going to be something that will do really good on like the first day or two of OU, and then will immediately fall off after that. Next up, though, a couple Pokemon I think that might actually stay around, but still currently are not OU. We have a Terra Fairy Gengar to start off with, and I think this is a Pokemon that either way could be viable. Though I will say that Terra Fighting could also be a good option. Basically, it's just a Ghost Gengar set with Nasty Plot, Stabs currently, and then some sort of coverage for Dark. Could be pretty useful. I think that Fairy will be slightly better just because it's also really good for Dragons, and especially in terms of getting a really good Dragon switch in before a Terra type change, this could be pretty good because I think a lot of Dragons will end up actually being great abusers of Terastal, because just like normal typing, they have amazing Stab early on. The difference being, though, is I don't really think there are a lot of normals that could have the stat line to take advantage of this while still being offensively potent. So I think that Dragons will be the primary abusers of this. Though Gengar, I think, could still be a good shout. With 110 speed, you're able to get some really good offensive presence off, and especially with the Fairy-type coverage through the Terastal, you could end up actually getting some really free KOs with this Pokemon. Finally, though, I do want to go over one more Pokemon, being Rotom-Wash with Terastal Ice. If Hidden Power Ice is a placeholder, this would imply, obviously, that the move does end up coming in that basically functions as a Hidden Power, but for the Terra typing. But this could be a Nasty Plot Rotom that I think could actually be pretty good. Terastal Ice, for example, you would be weak to things like Water and Fire, for example, which you could go for Hydro Pump on. As far as Steel typing goes, I don't think a lot of Pokemon will change into Steels necessarily, outside of maybe Physical Dragons. But even outside of that, though, Pokemon like Heatran would get hit pretty well by Hydro Pump, for example. And Pokemon like Skarmory and Celesteela, if they ended up getting in the game, or even Corviknight as well, would be hit pretty well by Thunderbolt. To be fair, I think that Skarmory and Corviknight might have merit for Terra Fighting at the very least, with Iron Defense Body Press, but even still, I think that having the coverage for the switch-in could be pretty useful. Especially if they're before they actually change into the pure fighting typing that would hit Rotom super effective with Body Press. This could be a pretty interesting option. Rotom has a lot of other options, though, that it could run. Even just a pure electric type with Levitate would have no weaknesses, and that could be pretty useful in itself with the Hydro Pump. But the logic being, though, is I think that Rotom-Wash could have a couple options that it could abuse pretty easily with Terra in general. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you guys think will be really good down below. And if you enjoyed, again, leave a like below and subscribe for more content like this. And with that said, I'll see you at the very least on Wednesday, if not sooner, with another video. Until then, peace out, guys.